Hey, I'm Mark Norman.
Felipe Esparza.
This is Will Sylvester.
I am comedian Jared Freed.
Hi, is comedian Shantae Wayans.
Oh, this is Lazo Lagola.
And you're tuning in to Come My Mouth Podcast.
Tune into the Comedy Mouth Podcast, homie.
And you are now tuning in to the Comedy Mouth Podcast.
And you are tuning into Comedy in Your Mouth Podcast. Why you don't listen to Comedy in Your Mouth?
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Comedy Mouth. I'm very excited today because today I'm not only speaking to one of the greatest comedians of all time, but my guest today is someone who is special to me, as my guest today is one of the first comedians that I was ever introduced to, and this comedian made me fall in love with comedy. So I'm grateful, I'm honored, and a little bit starstruck. Brian Regan, welcome.
Wow, Joshua, what kind words. Thank you so much, man. Good to be with you.
But I'm sure that you get that like pretty often, because I mean, you've been in the industry for a while now. So I'm sure that you get like, you know, these up and coming comedians always coming to you going like, you know, your comedy like influenced me.
Well, you're very nice. When you first started saying legendary and all those nice things, I thought maybe you had the wrong guy. I thought you were about to say, so please welcome Jerry Seinfeld. And I'm like, oh man, I'm a half hour off on the scheduling. But, no, I like doing what I do, and if there are comedians or people out there who enjoy what I do, it means everything to me.
So like kind of just to start this off, you know that, as I said, you were one of the first comedians that I was ever introduced to, because I started watching South Park from a very young age. I had very lenient parents, like grade 2. So I came across a DVD that had the Comedy Central logo, and it was Comedy Central Presents. And on that DVD, it had yourself, Lewis Black, I think it was Mitch Hedberg, and I think Jim Gaffigan and a whole bunch of other people. And I'll never forget that that joke that you told about the optometrist. I would go on the bus every single day, and I would like repeat that joke to as many people as I could. So I mean, it definitely had like a huge influence on me.
That's very cool, man. I grew up in Miami, Florida, and my optometrist growing up has come to my show a few times, and you know, it's kind of cool because he feels like he was the, I don't know, the reason for the bit, but it's sort of a composite kind of thing. But anyway, I appreciate you liking it.
So when you obviously started writing these jokes, how did you know that you had like this knack for, I don't know, observational comedy? Like, how did these things almost like come to you?
I don't know. I mean, to me, I think it's smart to feel like you've never got it figured out. You know, it's a constant goal to try to figure out what makes people laugh and what makes, you know, I don't know, because I did shows this last weekend and the weekend before, and I threw some new stuff out there that got absolutely nothing. So, you know, I have an idea of what I think is funny. I know it's funny to me, but what's fascinating to me about comedy is what is funny in one's head doesn't always translate to other people's heads. You know, you can have an idea, you can guess, but you never know for sure. And that's what's thrilling about it.
Absolutely. So kind of on that note, when you actually go out onto stage, are you like writing out the jokes fully and you kind of memorize it like that? Or it's like, oh, you come up with this concept and then you kind of like build the concept while you are on stage?
Both of those. I will have an idea for a bit. I want to have an outline. You know, like I kind of want to feel like how it starts, what happens in the middle, and what happens at the end. But I don't have it all worked out. And then I hit the stage. I tape almost every show. And a lot of the writing takes place on stage. You know, I mean, like you just kind of go up there with an idea. And I love the heat of the moment of being on stage. There's a difference between writing, you know, with a pen or writing on a computer at a keyboard and writing on stage, because I sometimes feel people can get too cutesy and too clever when they're writing with a pen or on a keyboard, but when you're on stage, something just takes over and you get right to the quick, you know? It's like, you don't need those 6 words, just say this now. And then boom, you get a laugh and you go, okay, that's the way it needs to be done.
Absolutely. But you know what I've noticed is that there's certain comedians, obviously I know this based on interviews, but there's certain comedians when they go on stage, they're always kind of like thinking ahead of what they're going to be saying next as opposed to actually being in the moment. So what type of a comedian do you kind of fall on that type of a spectrum? Because I mean, you're performing night after night. So, you know, obviously there's a little bit of fatigue that kind of comes into the picture over there. So what's your kind of method?
I think it's important to resist the urge to be anywhere other than in the moment, because people are, we're animals. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it in, like, we have instincts, and if your mind is somewhere else, I think people pick up on that, so even if you're doing a bit that you've done over and over again, you want to do your best to make it feel like you're living it out and saying it almost for the first time, even if it's your 500th time. And I feel like that helps bring an audience into what you're trying to say, and it makes things feel funnier. I see a lot of acts do bits that they've done for years, and I don't think they're hitting them as good as they as they used to be able to do, because I feel like they're in memorization mode. It's like, I'm going to tell you this stuff I have memorized, and you want it to feel more immediate than as if you're giving a recitation,
So that's one of the strangest things about comedy is that I don't think, and this is obviously just a personal opinion, but I don't think that comedy can work like a greatest hits type of a thing where it's like, like music. Because I think that you have to constantly come up with new music new comedy, because comedy is always evolving. So do you think that if a comedian had to go out and maybe do a joke from like 20 years ago and they had to come back out onto stage and do that same joke, do you think that that's lazy, or do you think that, what's your kind of opinion on that?
Well, I agree with you. It's weird because I talk to people all the time, and they say when they go to see a famous band, all they want to see are the greatest hits. They get disappointed when they're trying to do new stuff. And I get that in terms of music, but in terms of comedy requires a surprise. That's part of the rule of comedy, is that there has to be a surprise. Although I've been able to get away with some bits that I've done for a long time, people still request them and they still seem to enjoy them, even though they know where they're going. I prefer to be doing stuff that's fresher. I like the analogy of running on virgin snow, making new footprints. That's more fun to me than snow with footprints all over it, so I like working on a bit, making it as good as it can be, maybe getting it in a 5-minute, like Fallon or a Letterman or something like that. I mean, Letterman's off the air now, but doing a 5-minute spot with it, including it in a 1-hour special, and then it's done. Replace it with new thoughts and ideas. I feel like that is what motivates me, makes me feel like I'm having a good time. And if I'm having a good time, then I think the audience is going to have a good time as well.
Absolutely. How many times do you actually have to do a joke before like this is ready for a special?
Probably a couple of years. A couple of years of doing it over and over again, and massaging it from night to night. It's funny how you just take a word out or you put a word in and you feel like that joke is 5% better than it was before you made that change. Somebody who is a casual observer might not feel like the joke is any different, but in my mind, I'm like, man, I just, I improved that thing, and so I like to spend enough time with an idea, give it a couple years to where you feel like you have it in about as good of a way as you can get it. I mean, nothing's ever going to be perfect. A joke can't be perfect. A 5-minute set can't be perfect. An hour special can't be perfect. But that's the thrill in trying to get it as close to there as you can get.
Absolutely. But like obviously trying out jokes night after night after night, how do you know like now it's time for me to kind of like throw away this joke and not to almost get like married to that joke?
I use the 1-hour special as the line in the sand. Once I've laid something down within an hour, I feel like, okay, there it is. It exists. You know, this is the kind of stuff they'll be playing it on, you know, satellite radio. This is the form that it now exists in. I might do it for a short time after that while I'm transitioning into a new hour of material. But for the most part, in my mind, I like to think of that as it's done. The material is done. It exists for posterity or whatever you want to call it. And then I like that excitement of doing new stuff that I don't know how it's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of want to take it back a little bit. So obviously you started in Florida at an open mic night.
Right.
Was it a very small scene when you started off?
When I decided I wanted to be a comedian, I was in college, and I dropped out of college to do stand-up comedy. So if parents are watching this podcast, they'll edit this part out. There'll be like a jump cut, and then they'll insert me going, "Stay in college, kids." You know, they'll insert that audio track, but it won't match what my lips had said. Anyway, I dropped out of college because I had this burning desire to do comedy. When I wanted, at that time, comedy clubs were only in New York City and Los Angeles. I didn't know of any other place. So I was prepared to move to New York City to get into stand-up comedy. And then a comedy club opened in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which is right near where I grew up in Miami. Just by luck, you know, and I was fortunate enough to start there. And then I was there for like 2.5 years, going on every night, just trying to develop some little kind of act. And then during that 2.5 years, that's when comedy started exploding around the country. Comedy clubs started opening in cities all throughout the country. And so I was just very fortunate that this wave started, and I was learning how to surf at the same time that waves were starting to form. And I could not have gotten luckier in terms of timing. You know, it's like right when I wanted to do it, a club opened in Fort Lauderdale. Right when I wanted to go out on the road, that's when comedy clubs open around the country. It was just magical, and I'm very fortunate.
It's insane. But what was your first night like? Do you remember it very well? Like, do you remember the first joke that you told? Did you bomb?
My first night in a comedy club, the club was called the Comic Strip in Fort Lauderdale, and it was
Like the one in New York?
Correct. It was the sister club to the one in New York City. And so the one in New York was very successful. They opened one in Fort Lauderdale. So I went to their open mic night, and I was so nervous. It's hard to explain how nervous a person can be, but whatever the max is, I was at it. And you were allowed 3 to 5 minutes on an open mic night. And I had every word memorized, every word, like even, hi, how are you? That was written down and memorized, you know. So they introduced me as an open micer. They would put the open micers in between the professional comedians, but they would make it clear to the audience that you were new and that you were an auditioner. So they introduced me. I walk on stage. Right away, I'm thrown by how bright the lights are. I had no idea that I wouldn't be able to really see anybody. So I'm like dealing with that. I get to the microphone. So the first thing I have memorized is, hi, how are you? So I say, hi, how are you? And I get feedback in the mic. And it goes, and I ad-libbed. I said, well, I've already learned one thing. I don't know how to work a microphone. And that got a good laugh. But it erased my brain. Like, because my next joke came after, hi, how are you? And then it went into the next joke. I blanked out. I just completely blanked. And now I had just gotten a laugh, but I couldn't think of the next thing I was supposed to say. So I'm just standing there. And then I said, well, you're not going to believe it, folks. I just forgot my act. And then that got a laugh. And, but I wasn't saying that to get a laugh. And I said, no, I'm serious. I can't remember anything. And then that got a laugh. So
people just thought it was like part of the persona, that you just like this forgetful person.
They thought it was a gag. And so after about 3 or 4 times of me saying, I'm not joking, I can't remember my act, I was wise enough to realize, okay, they're laughing at this. So I just started ad-libbing about how dumb I was. I said, all I needed to memorize was 3 to 5 minutes, and clearly I'm not qualified to do that. Like all kinds of ad-libs about how dumb I was for not being able to do 3 to 5 minutes. And it killed. Like it just absolutely killed. And I said, I just wrapped it up by saying, well, I don't see myself remembering it, so I guess it's best I just walk off stage. And they laughed at that. And I said, good night. And I got a big round of applause. I walked off, but I was like shell-shocked, like I was torn between.
Like what just happened?
What happened? Like, was that good? Was that bad? Like in my gut, I knew it was good. I knew that I was able to make them laugh, but there was still a part of me that was like, am I a complete failure at this? And then some of the professional comedians came up to me and said, they were like complimenting me on the routine. They said, that was a great routine where you pretended to not know your act. I'm like, I wasn't pretending. I didn't know. Couldn't remember anything. And they were like, okay. So that was my first time on stage. Was I absolutely killed, if you will, but because I couldn't remember anything and I just goofed on myself.
But what's the strangest thing about the structure that you just described, where it was like you have like a professional comedian, like a headliner, and then an open mic, and then a headliner. Isn't that quite daunting? The fact that you're going to be literally like right before a main headliner, so people have just got these very high expectations.
Yes, it was a very bizarre way to do it. That club where I started did comedy in a way that I've never seen anywhere else. They would have 3 co-headliners. They were all considered co-headliners, 3, and they all did 45 minutes. That was 6 nights a week. And then on Monday night, in addition to them, they put open micers in between them. So it was just, nobody knew how to do comedy. Nobody knew how to structure it. It was a new thing, but that's the way they did it where I started. And yes, you had to follow somebody who was great. And then after you, somebody who was great was going to go on stage. And then we were just snuck in between the headliners.
That's daunting. That's very daunting. What kind of like prompted you to do it though? Were you like funny amongst your friends and family? What was kind of that thing that made you realize I've got the knack for this?
Well, I always liked comedy. I always enjoyed it as a fan. I always enjoyed watching stand-up comedians. There were, obviously George Carlin, Richard Pryor. I mean, everybody was fans of them. But I remember watching like a guy, his name is Kelly Monteith, very funny guy. He didn't make it huge, but he and still is a very good stand-up comedian. And, he would do like the Mike Douglas show and the Merv Griffin show, like these afternoon talk shows. And I remember being fascinated that was a job, that somebody would come out and just be funny. Like that's your job. So I was always interested as a fan, but it wasn't until I was in college where I started thinking, can I do that? Like I started having these weird thoughts, like maybe I can do this. And then I started doing college activities. Like I would MC events on campus. I wasn't as a stand-up comedian per se, but I was on the microphone and I was introducing all the stage presence, introducing all the basketball players, introducing the cheerleaders. And I would be funny while I was doing it. And I just loved that feeling. And then I got into theater. And one of the first plays I was in I had the comic relief role. And I had a very tiny role, but every time I would go on stage, it was big laughs. And I just remember feeling like, whatever this is, this is what I want and need in my life. And so that's what just got me motivated. And I remember thinking, it was one of the first things I was passionate about, I'm like, this desire to do this is so strong that I'm willing to figure out and do whatever I got to do to make it happen, And so that was exciting to me, that I didn't know what the blueprint was, but I was like, I have to make a blueprint. I have to figure out how to do comedy and where to go and all of that. And it set me on a pretty cool quest.
But there's always that fundamental difference between being funny, like in front of like your friends and like, just at a barbecue, and actually being funny in front of like a crowd that you don't know. So obviously you were put in good stead, whatever the word is, because you managed to do all those events, like at the basketball games and, introducing the cheerleaders, etc. But, after that, did you realize, after your first time on stage, that this is the persona that I need to take on in terms of playing somebody that's almost self-deprecating?
Well, it's interesting. That club where I started, they had the open mic nights on Monday night. Once I auditioned, I think 5 times, and on my 5th audition, I passed. When you passed, that meant you could go on nights other than Monday. And the way they did it at that club was the local comedians, the guys who had passed auditions but weren't headliners, could go on at the end of the show. So after an audience saw 3 good acts, 45 minutes each, then the guy who ran the club, Joe Mullen, very great guy, he wanted the MC to go on stage and make a very clear distinction between the good comedians and the comedians the people were about to see. So he wanted the MC to go on stage and say, I'm not making this up. Well, folks, that's it for our show, meaning the good show is over. So that's it for our show. We thank you for coming. We do have some local comedians who are just getting started. They come up and do a few minutes each. If you'd like to hang around and give them an audience, you're welcome to do so. If you need to go, we appreciate you being here. So that was the setup, if you will. And so I was one of the comedians that went on to people leaving. And so I developed this completely self-deprecating act. I had this whole routine about doing comedy to people who were walking out. And I got really good at it, and it was like a selfie-facing, I'm not good enough, I'm just the busboy here and all that sort of thing. And so that was kind of the act that I did. I had jokes within there. It wasn't like I was just making fun of the situation. I also had jokes, but I would sandwich them around me making fun of the situation. And then I got good enough where they moved me up to the opener and let me open the show. They would let a local opener do 10 minutes before the headliners. And I remember the first times I did that thinking, I don't know what to do because nobody's leaving. I felt like saying, somebody get up and leave so I can make fun of them.
It's just like I have to rewrite my entire act. Thanks, guys. This is because you're staying.
Yeah. But why are you paying attention? I don't have an act that works when people are paying attention, So I had to figure out how to be funny when people were actually looking at me. Obviously starting off in Florida and then going to places like New York, do you kind of feel like the audiences are almost different and that you had to almost like tweak your act because you're going into more of a saturated market, so to speak? I try not to cater my act to a geographical region. I always feel like the act should be about what I think is funny. I don't mean that in a cocky way, but I'm qualified to know what I think is funny. I'm not qualified to know what other people think is funny. Like I just said, I just did shows this last weekend where I did bits that got nothing, So for me, I feel it's a mistake to try to chase the audience, to try to figure out what they want. I always just use this trick of pretending I'm in the audience. Go, all right, what would I laugh at if I was in the audience? What would make me laugh? And of course, I hope others agree. I hope other audience members also think what I think is funny is funny. But I try not to go, okay, I'm in New York, I need to do it like this. I'm in Ohio, I need to do it like this. I want it to just be what I want to present, and hopefully people will hook in.
But you're also a comedian that appeals to every single age group, which is also amazing. So you're not necessarily limited also by like the geographic sort of a spectrum, like you said.
Right.
But have you ever thought about, or did you ever attempt to try and do a little bit of that edgier humor like Carlin and Pryor? Because you did say that you were influenced by them.
You mean using like rough language and stuff like that?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, well, not to try to be like them, but when I first started, I didn't, you kind of throw everything at the wall. I wasn't completely clean when I started. I had jokes that had 4-letter words in them. I had jokes about, the little sexual theme to them or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was always a small percentage of my act. Just how I think naturally, comedically, doesn't really go there.
Yeah.
I mean, off stage with my friends and buddies, I can be as crude and rude as anybody else. But in terms of what I come up with as a comedian, I tend not to go there. And so, when I went out on the road, I remember when I first went out on the road after starting at the comic strip, you play some rough rooms.
Yeah.
And I remember having 3 dirty jokes. One I opened with, to get their attention. And then I would segue into the stuff I wanted to do. I had a floating joke that I would throw in there. Like if I felt the audience reaction was starting to come down, I'd throw another 4-letter word in there, get them back. And then I'd do my stuff, and then this would happen. And then I close.
Like fishing.
Yeah.
It's kind of just like fishing, you're just kind of like throwing it into the audience, and then they catch the bait, and then they're just like, no, and then they let go, and then you got to just quickly do it again.
That's a perfect analogy. So I had 3 jokes that I would use to survive, so that I could get the job done, if you will, and get enough laughs. And then I would sprinkle my stuff in between there. But then I got to where I felt like I was cheating. I felt like I was doing stuff that I wasn't as proud of as the other stuff. And so I just said, I don't want to, that to me is an example of chasing the audience. It's like, I'm giving them what they want, and I'm not giving them what I want to say. And so I just stopped doing it. I was just like, I'm just going to live and die on how I think as a comedian, regardless of what happens. I might not do as well as I can do with the 4-letter word jokes, but then I started liking it because I felt like it was a new challenge. It was a new challenge. It was a new challenge for me to get as much laughs as I could without hitting certain buzzwords,
Absolutely. So like, how far into your career did you feel almost that consistency in your voice, where you could go out on stage and you felt confident and you knew the act that you were going to put out there, and it wasn't going to be a thing of where you had to kind of just like throw the bait, so to speak, just so that the audience could be reeled in?
I remember playing a club in Atlanta, and the guy who booked the room had seen me when I first auditioned, when I first went out on the road and auditioned at clubs. And it was 7 years afterwards. And he had this thing in his head. He said, 7 years is the line where you can tell if somebody either figures it out and becomes really good, or else they're never going to figure it out. And I was like, oh, what category are you putting me in? Are you hinting that I should,
So what do you mean?
Yeah. No, but, he was saying that he felt like I had evolved into having a comedic voice and that sort of thing. And I guess I kind of feel that is accurate for me. I mean, I don't know if 7 years on the line is something, but at that point, I felt like I was beginning to have a feeling of knowing the kind of stuff I wanted to say on stage and having an ability to do it.
Absolutely. So you performing now in Vegas with regards to a residency.
No, I don't perform here.
Oh, you don't perform in Vegas?
No, I live in Las Vegas, but I don't perform here. My kids are here. They're older now, but I never wanted to perform where my family was, because I want my home to feel like my home. And, most people want a short commute You know, most people want to be able to get up and drive 5 minutes to their job. I want my job to be 1,000 miles away from my home. I want the longest commute possible. So it seems like a weird place to live and not be in show business, but that's the case.
So are you traveling to all these other places like New York, and then whenever you want to come home, you go to Vegas? Why was the decision to live in Vegas?
Well, years ago, I was living in Los Angeles, and I was married at the time, and we had our son, and then we were about to have our second child, our daughter, and my ex is from Las Vegas. So we decided to come here because her whole family is here, her mom, her sister, and so it would be good for her when I did travel that she'd have, you know, companions and help with the kids and that sort of thing. So that was the motivation for moving here. And so it wasn't to work here. It was just because this is where her family was from. But we're no longer, you know, together, but I still love it here, and it's a great city. I mean, a lot of comedian friends come through town, so I get to hang out with a lot of comedian friends, and it's a great place to be.
Absolutely. You know, like coming from South Africa, I went to Vegas when I was in 8th grade, like with my parents and everything. And I had no idea that there was an actual population like living in Vegas. Because I mean, you watch the movies and things, and you just think to yourself, oh, like nobody lives here. It's just like for tourists. So I mean, that was a little bit of a shock for me. And also knowing that there's like a new Vegas and an old Vegas is also crazy.
Yes. Yeah. There's the downtown area, which is older school, but they keep reviving it. I kind of wish they wouldn't. I kind of wish they would leave downtown Vegas like the really old school 1950s, 1960s. That's old school for Vegas. But and then let the strip, the stuff further south
Keep being
be the
revamped.
new stuff.
Yeah.
But they're reviving everything, and this city is constantly. I did a joke in an interview one time, and the guy got it wrong. I was talking about Las Vegas, and I said, if they find any building that was built before the turn of the century, and I meant 2000. I said, if they find any building that was built before the turn of the century, they immediately knock it down and build a new one. Well, the guy wrote in the article, Brian Regan said, if they find any buildings that were built before 1900, they knock them down. And I'm like, how is that a joke? That's just what people do. You knock down old buildings. I'm like, that's completely not a
You know what? You're not wrong. Like, you know, the whole aesthetic of like downtown Vegas, where you've got like the pink flamingo and everything, and then you've got this random zip line just kind of like going overhead, and it doesn't fit.
right.
And you've got a random restaurant called the Heart Attack Grill, which is like, you know, like in this like peak Vegas. Have you ever been to the Heart Attack Grill before?
I have not. I know of it, but I haven't been in there. But I know the reputation of the place.
Most American concept I've ever heard in my entire life. And then obviously with late night, I mean, you obviously have a very big footprint in late night. Do you think that late night has changed, obviously from the days of Letterman? Or do you think it's still as relevant?
Well, everything has splintered off. You know, when I first got into comedy, the gateway was the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Like every comedian had the same goal. That's what you wanted to do, get on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And then Arsenio Hall came out, and then more and more shows, and then it became more splintered, if you will. And now those shows are important. I'm not saying they're not, but there's so many different ways now to get content to the public that, you know, you can get on a late night talk show, you can get a podcast, you can get a Netflix special, you can do all these different kinds of things. So there are different ways of getting it out there. It's still a big feather in someone's cap to do a late night talk show, but it's not the career changer that it used to be. You know, it used to be like, it was huge to get a late night talk show.
Yeah. So like any comedian that would kind of go on Carson, like for instance, like Eddie Murphy, they would just kind of like blow up. But nowadays, you know, if you go on Fallon or anywhere else. It's just like, you know, you're getting your name out there, but it's not necessarily this thing of that you're going to like blow up. Like this is your make it moment.
Right. It's a huge credit. You know, I mean, for a lot of comedians to work as headliners in comedy clubs and stuff like that, those clubs are looking for credits. So if you can say, hey, I've done Colbert, or I've done Fallon, or I've done Kimmel, that's like a vetting system. The club then knows, okay, if they're good enough to do that, they're probably good enough for my club. So it works well as a credit, but whether or not it translates to the public going, oh my gosh, there's this comedian, he was on such and such, you got to go see him. It's very hard for that to happen these days, you know.
So who in your opinion do you believe is the best late night talk show host at the moment?
I think that's a minefield.
It's a minefield. We'll skip that question.
I'm amazed at how unbelievably equal they all are in talent.
They're all great. We'll leave it at that. They're all great.
It blows my mind how unbelievably the same they are. I don't mean the same. That's like an insult. I mean, they're all good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's just a political climate that we're living in where, you know, it kind of like permits for that. But
I will say this, though, going back to, I was a huge fan of Johnny Carson, and I was a huge fan of Letterman. I mean, I loved watching Letterman as a host. I mean, I was fortunate to do his show, but I found him to be very funny, but also very genuine. And he listened to his guests. You know, a lot of times it feels when you watch talk shows that the hosts are just going to the next question on the list. You know what I mean? And I like when somebody's truly listening and truly able to be funny by listening to what the guest is saying. And I also like when a host lets the guest shine. You know, Johnny Carson was great at that. You know, he would let other people be funny, and he laughed. I'm going off on a different tangent, but that's one reason why I think Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee works so well. Everybody knows he's funny. Everybody knows he's great. But the reason that works is he laughs. He doesn't have the kind of comedy ego where he has to be the funniest person in the room. He has people in his car that he thinks are funny, and when they say something funny, he gives it up. And that's why it works. You know, like if he were just only trying to use that opportunity to be funny himself, it wouldn't be nearly as interesting.
But also, I think with a lot of the late night talk show hosts now, a lot of them aren't practicing comedians. So they started off as comedians, but I mean, obviously, with it being a very time constraining job, a lot of them aren't comedians anymore. So I don't know if that could also like maybe contribute to it. Because I mean, I think that the only one currently that's doing stand-up comedy is Trevor Noah, but I'm not sure outside of that.
Yeah, it's definitely a full-time job, you know. I agree. I mean, I don't know that I would want to take on a job like that. I don't think I would have the skill set anyway. You know, you have to have a wide variety of skills to be able to do that. But I prefer having the freedom in my career to still be able to do stand-up comedy.
Absolutely. And obviously, as an established comedian, who do you think we should look out for as an up-and-coming comedian?
Man, there's so many good comedians out there. Well, I was going to say Sebastian Maniscalco, but he's no longer up and coming. He's already arrived, if you will. But I used to throw his name into the mix, and he's certainly done tremendously well for himself. There are some comedians that I work with who, you know, there's a guy named Steve Rogers, young guy who, you know, I just saw performing at a open mic kind of thing, and not an open mic, but like a show with a handful of comedians on it. And, you know, he comes out and tours with me. He recently did a Colbert, and he's a funny guy. Joe Zimmerman is very funny. You know, there's a lot of people out there doing some unique, interesting things. And that's what I like about comedy.
Absolutely. Well, anyways, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
My pleasure. I I've been drinking coffee the whole time, and I'm looking at my little face in the screen, and I feel like I've got a black coffee tongue, and I apologize.